Hello, and welcome to Saving People Queering Things, a supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road.
They really put the whole special juice. This is a Sarah Gamble episode, isn't this?
In a shocking twist which surprised no one. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we are exploring Season 2, Episode 13, Houses of the Holy, through the theme of mercy. I am Abigail, your host, and joining me today is a very special guest, Klaudia, who is the host of another Supernatural show called the Mystery Spotcast. So can you introduce yourself, tell our listeners about your experience with Supernatural, why you love the show, and also where they can find you?
Hi, I'm Klaudia. My pronouns are she, her. You can find me on social media at Klaudia Says, K-A-L-U-D-I-A Says, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram are my main. So yeah, I'm the co-host of the Mystery Spotcast with my friend Ollie, and my experience with Supernatural is very common among those who are terminally online in that I did start it with the trifecta of Super Hula when I was in high school. It was the last Infinity Stone in the three. So I started watching it my senior year of high school, and then the summer before college, and then all through my freshman year, maybe first and second semester of college. You can imagine what kind of person I was. I really apologize to anybody who knew me as a freshman in college. Mainlined like 8 seasons of Supernatural at once, and I already knew a lot about it, obviously from Tumblr. So already there were pieces of it that felt like a rewatch, but I didn't know any of the major plot twists or anything, so like a lot of it was crazy for me the first time. But then after that, I caught up, and then I kept watching it week by week, as it was coming out, because I was like, there are very few things that bring me serotonin, and I was like, I like my garbage, and my garbage is fun. When Destiel went canon, whatever, like, I was still watching it, and I will say, I don't know, maybe like a year before, like, or whatever, I made a joke being like, here's the thing, Destiel's never gonna happen, but if it were to happen, I want to be caught up, I want to be deep in the shit, I want to know exactly what's happening, whatever. And I was like, is it? No. But in the like 0.0001% chance it ever did, I want to. And it was like my running joke for a long time. And then it did, and I was like, who am I?
We are living in the one universe where it became canon. The one universe.
Literally. So I'm one of those people who had been watching it. I watched the finale live.
Oof. You got that roller coaster. You got that roller coaster just happening to you.
Well, it was quite a roller coaster. I also work in news, so you can imagine what my brain was like in 2020 when Destiel happened.
Oh, that month was a whole thing.
And then the end of Supernatural. But yeah, that's been my experience with Supernatural. And then starting the Mystery Spotcast, I co-host a Star Wars podcast, and one of my co-hosts, Ollie, is the only other one who likes Supernatural. And our other co-hosts yell at me when I do bring up Supernatural as a joke. I don't bring it up seriously. I bring it up as a joke because I know it is a Star Wars podcast, and so I try to keep it on task, but I do sometimes when they get mad at me. And I made some sort of joke or something on TikTok, and then my co-host Ollie was like, what if we did this?
All good podcasts start as a joke between friends.
Yeah. Why do I love this show? I would say, damn, I like to describe this. People are like, is Supernatural good? And I'm like, that's complicated. I would say, like, I like it because, and there's a lot of things that I like because of this, Star Wars being one of them, that when it's good, it's really freaking good. It's really good. And when it's bad, it's so abysmally bad. And there's really nothing in between.
No, and there's something about what that does to your brain.
Yeah.
To watch something when you never know if you're going to get like full to the brim quality content, or you're just going to get a heaping pile of trash. And like, there's something about that experience. Yeah. Like, I think genre shows like this have ruined me for like, more serious kinds of media, or, quote unquote serious kinds of media that are like consistent.
I'm a fan of The Expanse, and I just started watching The Wheel of Time, and I was like, this is good television with good representation. What do I do with this? What do I do with a full meal? I'm used to crumbs. What do I do with this?
And also,
what do I do with this?
What do I do with like taking, like, I can't take apart something that is just like good. I'm like, that's enjoyable. you know, I can still talk about it a lot, but like there's something about the unique experience of having to mine for gold that, you know, makes it all the more satisfying when you find
gotta put
gold.
in some work.
Yes,
you know?
which you have to with this show consistently,
Yeah.
but you don't have to in this episode very much.
This episode really exemplified, I think, some of the like brainworms that probably for a lot of people, and I was one of them, they got to people where they were like, I'm gonna make this my whole goddamn personality. Like
It's true.
But you're like, maybe it is more than a show about these two white dudes driving in a car. Like maybe there's meaning in this. This was one of the episodes where I was like, oh, there's a like meaning in this show.
There's like resonance in the themes that are happening here. There's like they are trying to ask some questions about things that are big ass questions.
Do they answer them? Who knows?
Who knows?
I was like, damn, okay, like it hit me in a place. But yeah, that's kind of why I love the show. And any of the stuff that I like, things where it gives you a really good the sand in the sandbox may not be so great, but it gives you a good sandbox and some good toys in the sandbox, and the sandbox is very large, and it's like, you know what, I like staying in this sandbox. It's my favorite.
You can sit in the sandbox and be like, this sucks. Or you can sit in the sandbox and be like, I'm gonna make a sand castle. You know, may not have started as much, but we got there. We got there.
It's like, you know what? They built a good size. There's a lot to work with here.
Which I will say, this episode will probably contain some spoilers because there is too many good things that we do not want to avoid talking about. I anticipate from my notes and from our discussion during the episode that there will be some spoilers for season 4,
season
5,
15.
and 15. Specifically 4, 5, 11 and 15 specifically. If you really don't know anything and you really want to avoid those, I would caution you with this episode. That's all I'm going to say on that. We want to play in the sandbox. We're going to have a good time. So it's now time for our series recap, the road so far. At the beginning of season 2, John traded his life for Dean and died at the hands of the yellow-eyed demon. There are also more and more special children with strange powers cropping up, with Sam and Dean meeting several of them, as well as having to evade hunters who are trying to kill them so they don't quote-unquote go dark side. John himself, right before he died, told Dean that he either had to save Sam or else kill him, a cryptic message that is creating a rift between the brothers as the season continues. That will bring us to this episode and to our 30-second recap. Will you count me in?
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so there's this thing that's been telling people to kill other people and Sam and Dean come and they think maybe it's an angel. Well, Sam thinks it's an angel. Dean's like, that's bullshit. It's not an angel because angels aren't real. And it turns out it isn't an angel. And most of this episode deals with Sam and Dean having all these conversations where Dean's like, yeah, not an angel. Good things don't happen. And Sam's like, but maybe I need them to because maybe I need to be saved. And by the end of the episode, they've both kind of changed their tune. And yeah.
All right.
3, 2, 1, go.
So I'm going to go this by every time it made me feel insane, which means every time they mentioned angels or God, because that factors in quite a lot later in the series. And these were supposedly unplanned moments. We do start with a moment of Dean from like head up, like in bed, and it's like wildly inappropriate. And then and then you're like, what's going on here? Wow, I didn't even I didn't get very far.
That was amazing. It's now time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. This week, our theme is mercy. Do you have a place you'd like to start?
My biggest thing, the thing I kept joking about with this episode was like, oh, the spirit lets the person know who is the person who is going to do a bad thing to prevent them from doing so. And it's a very angel-based Minority Report situation. Pre-crime situation.
You're like, we know something's gonna go down, so we're just gonna like the person before that happens.
Yeah, and you're like, did you have to kill them? There's a lot to unpack here. They're bad people, but you're like, there's a lot to unpack here.
Like the morality of just killing people because you're convinced they're going to do a bad thing off of intel that may be from an angel? Question mark? Very big question mark.
Yeah. So that was my favorite part of the episode, kind of, is when they kind of deal with that, and Sam's like, well, whatever. And we joke about this on Mystery Spotcast is, Dean said a cab, and and he was like, he does say to Sam at one point where he's like, you've done bad things. Like, how do I know that you're not going to do something bad next? Whatever.
Sam is like being like, no, it makes sense that we like kill this guy. Sam's making this connection of like my own weird powers. Like maybe I'm evil secretly. Maybe I'll suddenly turn evil. And Dean's like, well, I'm not going to kill you before that happens.
Yeah.
Like, what are you kidding me? Like, no.
And for thinking about that theme, for me very much is Dean doesn't have a lot of mercy. Well, later on he does. But he doesn't have a lot of mercy for people who do bad things. Like, he ironically says, like, I only believe in something when I see it. And he's very much like that for people's crimes as well. Where he's like, yeah, I'm really only going to believe it when I see it. And he's very much like, even if I know they're going to do a bad thing, like, it's wrong.
It's that whole, like, Dean's real strong insistence on, like, free will.
Oh,
like,
no,
people have free will. People have free will, so they can choose something. So even if like they're destined to do something, Dean's like, screw that. Until they actually do it, they're not destined to do bullshit.
This is another reason why this episode does make you feel crazy, because having watched the rest of the show where they go, like, whenever they go back to the whole free will thing, and the way that Dean looks at it, where Sam's like, oh, well, maybe this is how it's supposed to be, whatever, and Dean's always like, yeah, fuck it, we're not gonna do it that way. It's literally, it happens over and over and over and over again, and to see almost like the start of that, I mean, it's happened a little bit before, but like kind of the start of that, you're like, whoa, this is a lot.
It's like the start of it really connecting to like faith and religious concepts too, because like the one episode I was thinking about in relation to this, episode 3, Bloodlust, the first episode that we have with Gordon, because they have this situation, but it's flipped where like at the beginning, Dean's like, they're monsters because they're vampires, so they're obviously monsters. They're monsters because of like who they are, their identity. They're going to be evil. They're going to kill people. And Sam's like, until they've done it.
Homophobia.
Yes, it is. But like that thing of like, in that situation, Sam's the one that's like, they haven't done anything yet. We should give them a chance. And in this episode, it's flipped where Sam's like, it's kind of because of the spirit, but also like, Sam's like, well, maybe, who you are is what you're destined to be.
With monsters a lot.
Yeah, it's that internalized sense of like, I'm the monster. And
later on for Dean, that's why he does change his tune, because he's like, I'm the monster, shit. That's why he becomes less likely to be like strike first. We joked in this that like there are a few episodes of Supernatural where they do maybe the real monsters are just human beings who do bad things, and there's a moment like that in this episode. Those are the few moments where I think you see Dean kind of reevaluate shit for himself.
Yeah, and like the thinking about mercy too, like, and in that scene that where you're kind of thinking about like the last scene, the car chase scene, where he's chasing the guy because he's trusting Sam's whole thing, where Sam's like, this guy's gonna do something bad, and then Dean's like sees him doing something bad and Dean's chasing him, but like it's unclear as to like what Dean's gonna do when he gets to him. Actually really unclear, because again, this is not a monster. Like, this is like a human dude who's doing something terrible, and then like shit happens and Dean doesn't get a chance to make that choice. But it's interesting because you're like, he, just that whole idea of like mercy and needing to see things with your own eyes, because like that's a thing that Dean has said every time Faith stuff comes up, because you also did that in Faith, the episode in season 1, where he's like, I believe in things I can see, like.
And Sam's like, we fight things that people don't believe in all the time, dummy.
We have, just because we haven't seen it yet doesn't make it not real.
Yeah.
Which, is a whole thing here.
Yeah. There's this whole religious aspect as well, where like, it's not an angel, it's the spirit of a priest. Who's doing this, who has no mercy for these people, even though they're bad people.
But it's interesting because he also uses like the first 2 people that see the angel and are like given this like mission from God are like people that would traditionally in like a lot of religious beliefs and circles be considered like the bad person, like just like the idea that they are killed, like
they're
the
sinners.
People, they're quote unquote sinners, and they go after these people who are like religious and like good people who like seem good but actually have these like literal skeletons in their floorboards.
That's a theme in Supernatural in general, like when Castiel has his little girl boss moment, the Westboro Baptist Church.
Which still remains one of my favorite things. Like Castiel becomes God, immediately is like, no homophobia here. No homophobia here.
Bestie. Like, but it's a theme in Supernatural where they're always like, whenever there's some sort of connection to God, they are always like, I'm going to use whatever traditional Christianity thinks of as a sinner to smite some ultra evangelical person. Like, they do it all
They
the
do
time.
it a lot, which is another interesting thing when it comes to like free will and like mercy. Like the idea that like mercy and like redemption, they use that word like twice in this episode. The idea that like redemption is available to anyone, like, but also that being religious or being pious or like thinking you're on the right track doesn't mean you are, and you can still make the choice to be a terrible person even if
people
you think
ask,
you're good.
Why do gay people really like this show? I'm like, because they do that constantly.
They call out the like hypocrisy of it in such a good way, and in such a like cool way too, because they are basing it around like free will. They're not just like flipping the table and being like, well, actually the group you thought was bad is good and the group you thought was good is bad. They're being like, actually it matters what you do with, you know, whatever it is.
That's why Sam's character is so interesting, because like I don't know if this is the first time he's had this conversation with Sam.
It's like the second or third time
where he's like, I don't go to church every day and I help monsters for a living, but like my faith is deeply important to me and something that like keeps me fucking going because this job is really hard. And Dean's like, I didn't know that, and he's like, glad you were fucking paying attention. But there's this representation, and there's other characters like this too. There's this representation of like people who are that their faith is still important to them, even if they don't ascribe to the organized form of it. That's pretty emphasized quite a lot. Castiel could even count as that as well. I wonder why gay people love Castiel.
Because again, that idea of, well, and like with both Sam and Cass in very different ways. This is the spoiler heavy part of our show, if you hadn't already figured that out. With like both Sam and Cass, you get these themes of like coming from a specific environment where you're told what to believe. And like in Sam's case, it's like told that like, you know, things that are not human are monsters and we kill them because they're bad. Full stop, end of story. That's what comes from John. That's where they start to like break out of that in this season, because they start to get confronted with like situations where it's blatantly not true, particularly in, you know, Sam's own identity. But then also like Cass in the same way, like Cass is part of the good guys, like in the very religious sense, and has almost the opposite thing of like, oh, you know, like you're supposed to be one of the good guys, but like you're doing all these like you're told you have to do all these terrible things and you're manipulative and you're using humans towards your own ends because, you know, God told you to, all these things. And like they're both kind of breaking free of those environments that where morality is really black and white. And I think I love this episode because it's just like Sam
sets up that framework for several seasons to come. And also like they go in and out of this, like they don't always engage with this. So you're like, oh, this is a little aperitif for later.
In terms of the creation of the show, like from what Kripke has said, like they were not intending on bringing angels in. This was before all of the events that kind of led to that choice in the writing and producing team. And so the fact that like they have all of this like religious imagery and like stuff about angels, and like it feels like a giant tease now you're like, how are they not setting up for what they came later? Because it's one of those times where it works so well.
This is where so many like famous gifs from Tumblr come from. Obviously there's one that they used with the Weeping Angels quite a lot, all those super Kulak ones. But there's the one where Dean is always like, oh, mom always said that angels were watching over me, is from this episode.
This is when Dean, well, they both have these revelations. Like Sam tells Dean, like, I pray every night, which is also like just all the time. And then Dean says, you know, mom said angels were watching over me. Like
you're like, I'm never gonna financially recover from this.
like season 2.
I remember feeling like fucking crazy like watching this maybe the second time. But now I'm watching it knowing Destiel is canon. That's another flavor.
This is the thing. I have a similar experience because the first time I watched this, like I watched probably the first 5 seasons like pretty quickly and before I was really active in the fandom. When I watched this episode originally, I remember loving the concepts of faith. Like I grew up in a religious community, like these ideas and these questions of like what makes a good person, what kind of faith is worthwhile, like what do you have faith in anyway when you know there's bad, you know, like all of these questions that this episode is like exploring. And I remember like loving this episode for that, but like having no idea what was coming. And then I've definitely rewatched it since then, because I've rewatched it since seeing season 5. And then like you said, this is the first time I watched it after seeing season season 15. You know, after you see about season 5, the scene with the painting where they point at the painting and they go, that's Michael, and they're pointing at the painting.
But he says in this episode, he talks about Michael and the sword too.
Well, this is the thing, and you get that scene in this episode, and like that scene is so interesting when you get to season 5.
Oh, also he says a Bible quote or whatever, but he says something about that like angels like watch and love us or something, and then it's like shot on Dean's face, and you're like, whoa.
Well, yeah. they really spend a lot of time in this episode emphasizing that Dean only has faith in things that he can see and experience.
And Castiel's like, oh, let me fix that.
But the thing is, like, Cass, like, fixes that, but also Cass is a thing that Dean actually experiences. Like, Dean is like, I must see at least some
He's the
fruit.
only, he does start praying. He's the only, he prays to Jack at one point, but
that's an extension of Cass.
Like,
that's an extension of his prayers, Cass.
Literally starts praying to Cat, like, especially when he was talking about praying and whatever, and I was like, to know this, knowing that multiple times, and he's on death's fucking door, he's like praying to Castiel.
And we'll call it prayer too. Like, I cannot see season 2 Dean, like, if he's communicating with something, he's not calling it praying. Because that's not the kind of attitude he's bringing to any of that kind of communication with any kind of being. But when Cass comes, it's a whole different story. Within like a season, there's an active sense of his relationship to faith has sort of shifted because of this experience. And it's so interesting in this episode because the reason he's like so skeptical is he's like, angels shouldn't be inciting people to murder. He's like, that's bad. If that's angels, like angels are bad. Also, it's not angels.
What's the quote about angels and violence?
It was like angels inciting people to murder. Like,
they're like, angels inciting people to murder would never happen. That's bad. And it's like, bum, bum, bum.
You know, let me introduce you to season 5.
Honey, you got a big storm coming.
Got a big surprise. It's like,
also,
really
have you read the Bible?
Yeah, and honestly, like the idea that like everyone, I mean, I don't think this is the case with Sam, but like Dean's like, no, angels can't exist because like good things can't exist in the supernatural world, and also like I've never seen one, so like, and contrasted with like Sam, who's like no, I need to believe in like God and angels and good things because like that's the only way I like am able to get up in the morning and like do my job. Like that's for Sam, it's this lifeline. For Dean, it's like they're Sam's faith and Dean's lack of faith are the reason they have those beliefs are the exact same reason. Yeah,
like radical optimism. Sam, and I believe there are other hunters, I think, who do. I want to say Garth, maybe.
Garth, I think, is a good example of that.
Who are like that, and that's why Dean thinks he's annoying because he's a lot like Sam.
Yeah. And also why he warms up to him once he understands.
Actually, Castiel would be another example where, like, Castiel's like, I have to believe there's something good in this world to keep going. That good thing happens to be Dean.
Because you know, like full fucking circle.
But like to be able to keep going because he loses his faith in everything else. It's very interesting to see. There's a couple characters I feel like that are like that. But like I have to believe in something that there's something good out there. Or else why the fuck am I here? Yeah, kind of deal. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like somebody else who's like that in the show.
I would say Jodie is another one.
Maybe
where like in some ways, like I think not necessarily at the beginning when we meet Jodie, but like later on Jodie, in the way that she's like, I have to make something good out of something, you know, like there's a lot of terrible things that have happened to me and to the people that I care about, but I have to make something good. And that's why I take in all these kids, and that's why I like still hunt, because like we've still got to live, and we've still got to have good things.
I think this is one of those early episodes that establishes these themes that run throughout that made it so that people were bonkers crazy bananas, because when you get this little taste of the show being good and having through line themes and whatever, people are like, I want more. I want some more of that. As evidenced by the fact that we're referencing things pinging around other seasons.
Well, and like things from all over the place, like all over the place.
That made people be like, oh, this is what it's about. Like, this is the straw I'm gonna grab onto. What happened? Where did it go? because there's many moments in the earlier seasons that are very much like this, that are very impactful. I mean, there's big moments too. Like, this is a smaller episode, but there's big moments like that too.
It's fascinating that this is a smaller episode, because like this is ultimately, because it's not actually an angel, because it's just like a spirit, this episode does not move any of the like plot forward, but it moves so much the thematic plot forward in terms of like our development of Sam and Sam's idea about his own identity. And like there's a couple of things that just like got in my head, like when Sam first interacts with the spirit, says, you know, I've seen the angel, he's like, I'm not gonna kill him, he's like, but something bad's gonna happen and like I can stop it. And this like Sam grasping at control, when the biggest thing in Sam's life has been that like control's always been taken away from him, with like his mom, with Jess, with hunting, with John. Like Sam always gets like an inch like closer to control of something in his life and then gets it wrenched away from him. And so Sam is like, something bad's gonna happen, I have finally something I can do about it. And it also reminded me of the scene at the very beginning of season 4. You know, Sam is talking to Ruby and is talking about how like he's like, no, I want to keep going like with what I'm doing to like exorcise demons. He's like, because I can stop all this bad stuff from happening, which I just thought was like super fascinating, that like that's like Sam's just like got to be able to do something to counteract the bad. The other one, I think it's the priest that says, the priest, when he catches Sam doing the spell work and he says, young man, you are in a house of God. And then I thought about the scene, like, you know, it's just so pointed. Like, you're doing this thing in a house of God. And I thought of the scene like when Cass and Sam first meet, and Sam is so excited. He's like, I'm meeting the angel, and I'm meeting an angel, like I'm meeting the angel. And Cass's first response is like, Sam Winchester, the boy with the demon blood. And just like that, like it kind of broke my heart when I like made that connection.
Castiel, you were wrong for that.
It's one of the moments that like every time I see that, I like, ooh, when I see Sam's face when Cass says it. And I think the reason this episode made me think of it was because like Sam wants so badly to be good, like so badly, and because he has this sense of like,
he hasn't done anything wrong
yet. And also like he's got this like these weird powers, he's got this weird like connection to the yellow-eyed demon that they don't fully understand yet. He like feels super responsible for like a lot of the things that like from Mary and Jess's death, like even though he hasn't unpacked why that is. And like I feel like the reason he clings on to like the idea of like external faith and like an external being is because he really needs there to be something external that he can cling on to. He's like, if I can emulate that, he's like, if there's a God that wants good, that is good, and there are good powers in the world too, I can emulate them and I can be good. And it like cuts so deep. Whereas like I think of moments like Dean wouldn't have that same kind of reaction. Not that Dean's not trying to be good, but it's not the same thing.
The term I like to use for Dean is perpetual harm reduction, and that's how he thinks of himself.
Yes.
Dean, and this is of course not me making it about Destiel, but like this is why Castiel being like, I think you are a good person and you are a good force in this world, it takes him aback, because he always thinks of himself as, I am here to prevent worse things from happening. I am here to prevent harm to people, but I am not a force for good, and I don't do good things. I just help people, and I do the things other people don't want to do, and whatever. And he thinks of himself as a lesser evil, if one might will. That's another reference for y'all listening. As a quick reference, when I did say it was a super Wholock, we don't acknowledge the BBC Sherlock anymore. However, the Star Wars Thrawn books, they are just a Sherlock fan fiction. So surprise! You have been super Wholocked in this.
You can never escape. I think we've managed to only have super Wholock come up like one other time in our show so far, and it was very brief. This is the longest. This is the most we've had it referenced, and I'm not sure how to feel about it. But like that thing, I love that. I love that.
Dean thinks of himself as the lesser evil. He thinks of himself as, that's why people telling him, I mean, Sam tries to tell him a lot, and then Castiel tells him whatever, like, you know, you are not the bad person or whatever, like, and this is
you
why
deserve good things, Dean, like,
literally,
you know. And like even I think of like an episode that's going to be coming not too long from now, What Is and What Never Should Be, and like the whole like Dean doesn't, even when Dean pictures a life where he's not hunting, he's still not the good person, in it. Because again, he still exists, like you said, to be that perpetual harm reduction. He's not trying to be good. And when to connect it back to like the theme of mercy, Sam is actively looking for merciful like treatment. Like he's like, maybe I am bad, but maybe if I try to be good, maybe if I try to make the right choices, I can have, maybe there'll be mercy extended to me. Maybe if I try to believe in good, mercy will be extended to me. Dean's like, I'm not looking for mercy. I am looking to do the best possible thing in a shitty situation. And what happens to me is irrelevant.
That's the irony, is that Sam at this point doesn't need it, but he thinks he does. And Dean at this point, well, he hasn't done that many bad things.
No.
Does need it.
But he's not looking for it.
He doesn't believe he wants it.
No, he wouldn't. Who offers
Dean mercy multiple times?
How many times?
Oh no, I'm regressing.
It's interesting because, again, there's that scene also, like, some people need redemption, don't they, Sam? And it's interesting because, like, so many characters, like, even side characters will do this thing, which, okay, this is the thing. So many side characters and one-off characters play into this whole, like, people need redemption, don't they, Sam? Like, insinuating that he needs redemption. And so many people play into the, like, Dean, you're just like a tool, or you're like a weapon, what happens to you is irrelevant. And, like, when you think about season 15, when you think about, like, Chuck and the way he's been writing, like, Chuck has been reinforcing, they never flip that script. These are never people who know the Winchesters. They never have any reason to, like, specifically target them.
I also, this is completely separate, but I realized one of the first angel mentions in the episode of them explaining the case and supposedly that it's an angel is when they go to the people's house and there's like leftover Christmas decorations, and he's like, man, like, why do people people need to take down their Christmas decorations or whatever. And I just kept thinking of, like, oh my god, it's literally a fallen angel. Like, it's literally a fallen angel on the court. Oh my god.
And like the scenes in the church where, like, Dean is confessing his lack of faith, like, paralleled with so many later scenes when they're in churches confessing things, or
when he has that conversation multiple times with Castiel.
Yeah. And it's just like, there's this, Dean says, one of the perks of this job is you don't have to operate on faith. Sam immediately flips that around and is like, but I'm asking you to have faith in me.
Don't Dean and Cass have that conversation?
Dean and Cass also have that conversation.
I'm not imagining that. I didn't Mandela effect myself, right?
No, I'm trying to place the conversation.
They do the same thing, like, over and over
again. There's a bunch of, they have conversations, they have multiple conversations on both ends, because both of them struggle with, like, having faith versus not having faith multiple times. So there's a lot of back and forth of, like, one of them having faith and one of them not.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely conversations that they have. And it's interesting. Like, I love some of the visual placements in this episode of the angel statues, the way they're positioned, the painting of Michael above Dean, like, literally behind Dean, so that you get the point of, like, that's Michael, and you get that whole scene where they're talking about what angels really are, and the visuals of, like, all of the bright lights, the crackling, like, when we get to season 4 and we actually introduce real angels, like, this angel, like, if you watch Supernatural backwards,
pretty on par,
you would 100% think this scene is 100% a real angel, because it's all the same. It's visually the same.
The demons change a lot, like the black eyes kind of go out the window. Like, there's a lot of stuff with the demons.
The smoke goes in through their eyes in the first, like, episode we see a demon in.
There's a lot of things with the demons that kind of go in and out, but with the angels, I mean, they're
actually one of the more consistent lore pieces. I'm actually impressed by that, because we've already talked about in our show, almost every week when we get to lore, we talk about how inconsistent whatever they're doing in the one-off episode is compared to everything else. But angels, even when they're not actually doing angels in this episode, they're doing angels the way they do them later, which is just kind of cool, which is interesting, because I wonder if Sam, because Dean doesn't see the angel himself in the same way. I wonder if Sam, though, when he first actually meets a real angel, remembers this moment and remembers this case and remembers, like, all of the, like, I just wonder if he remembers.
Oh man, it just opens this Pandora's box, and you're like, oh. And especially when they talk about God's will.
Literally the next note I was going to come to was the note about that. The quote in Faith, where Dean says, God save us from people who think they're doing God's will. This episode, again, what is God's will? You know, that contrast of like, they at this point, Dean's like, God doesn't exist because there's no evidence for that. And Sam's like, no, if God exists, like he's one of the good guys. Turns out neither of them are correct. God doesn't exist, and he's doing God's will, but God's will is bad. God's will he's a cruel, capricious God.
They talk about God's will and then a bunch of times, and you're like, damn, this is some meta, considering like he's supposed to be writing it the whole time. And then you're like, the other funny part was when they were like, when he was talking about, oh, I think it's more like chaos, and you're like, girl, you kissed chaos on the mouth, like, come on.
The show did too many things with lore. It did too many things. Try less things, Supernatural. So, okay, again, with the whole God's will thing, because we have to like come full circle to the end of the episode, because Sam is like devastated that it wasn't an angel, and he's, you know, like saying to Dean, like, you were right. He's like, I really wanted to believe that it was something good. Sam's like, I wanted to believe like I could be saved. And Dean's like, I'm watching out for you. Like, and this is coming on the heels of like John saying to Dean, you might have to take him out because maybe he's evil. Wink, wink. John Winchester, stop, please.
But that's what happens at the end of the show too, because he's watching out for him because then there's no God anymore, and then he dies.
We don't talk about that though.
Damn, I'm upset.
But then like Dean at the end of this, like Dean's last like line in here is like, he's like, you know, I don't know what was happening. Maybe God's will. And like that line, and
the music
hit me.
Is playing.
It's playing Knocking on Heaven's Door. And like the chills I say I had. The thing is, this is one of those things where the 3 different viewings of this, depending on what you've seen, change it. You see this originally, like you see this with no other context. You've only seen it up to season 2. Maybe God's will sounds like Dean is questioning his lack of faith for maybe one of the first times, which is like also something he did in Faith and in a couple of other episodes. If you watch it after season 5, maybe God's will starts to become a little bit sinister, but still ultimately is kind of like, God's will is not really concerned with collateral damage, but is still ultimately about like taking care of the bad guys. And then you think about it in terms of season 15. And then it just sounds like Chuck is bragging.
He's like, I wrote this one in just because I think it's funny.
Dean sees something random, really violent happen to someone who just did something bad. And he's like, maybe it's God's will. Like his entire connection and association with what God's will is super, super tied in to like violence and retribution. Yeah. And retribution. There's always conversation in this episode about redemption. And like Dean's connection with God's will in this episode is about retribution. Like,
well, and it has to do with also that he's supposed to be the sword of Michael as well. Like it always has to do with like, like revenge or whatever. And you're like, damn, my Catholic grandmother, and she's still alive. I don't know why I said that, but like rip to what she wanted for me. But like, man, maybe I know more about what the Bible means from this. This episode and this show it's so multi-layered. Like and I have to say, like the layers were crazy because it was like a lasagna. It was like every time they would mention angels, it would get worse. Like you'd be like, whoa.
Well, yeah, it's like it's building on itself, and every time you'd be like, they didn't plan this. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't already have angels worked into the plot line. Like they did. You can't tell me that they didn't have angels already worked into the plot line.
This foreshadowing has hands.
Exquisite foreshadowing. Yeah.
It's one of those ones where you're like, if I think about it for too long, I go kind of crazy.
I love seasons 1 through 3. Like I have a deep affection for them.
They're bopping a banger.
They're bopping banger. They're great. There are so many fantastic episodes. There's so much good setup. Like, but I also cannot wait to get to some of the stuff in season, like some of the thematic stuff in season 4 and 5. Like watching it through and talking about it every week, like the build of like trying to put myself in the head of these characters, trying to put myself in the storyline as it is, and not like I'm making bigger connections. This episode's a little bit of an exception, but a lot of what we're talking about week to week is like these characters don't know what's coming, but the writing is so rich and layered because of that.
I remember when I watched it for the first time, I was like, all right, I gotta get to at least season 4 so I can meet Castiel. I gotta meet Castiel. And I was like, there he is! Like, and I was plowing through the show so that I could get to at least Castiel.
Yeah.
And now, for some context for my partner, I was watching Supernatural like as it was coming out, seasons 14, 15. And my partner would like walk in the room and be like, I'm not gonna watch this crap, and then walk out. And but then on the episodes that were kind of good, they would just kind of stand there and kind of like, you know how dads do, and they're like, I'm not gonna watch it.
Or like, I'm not watching. They stand there for 25 minutes and you're like, you could sit down, stay a while.
And my partner was like, okay, maybe I kind of want to watch this show. And I was like, really?
You gotta get them on the good stuff.
So they saw Destiel go canon and they had no context for that, whatever.
Oh,
they saw it happen. They saw me have a mental breakdown. And to be fair, it was sort of spoiled for me because I didn't watch it like live. I usually would watch it on like the CW.com the next day or pirate it or whatever.
But it was impossible to ignore.
Yeah, no, literally, like, I had
someone call me. I had my best friend call me.
I had a friend text me. Actually, I was in the bathroom. Text me and go, "We won." And I'm like, "What do you mean
You're like,
we won? There's no election results out yet." Because I was working.
2020, folks. 2020.
I was like, the AP hasn't called it yet. What do you mean we won? That's a lie. And they were like, no. Check Tumblr. And I was like,
check Tumblr.
They don't have election results there. And I went on Tumblr
man.
and I just saw Destiel. Like a bunch of I was like, what do you mean Destiel? So I had to go look at what the fuck was going on.
Well, because
I was the first person a lot of people found out about it from, like, because I went on Twitter and I went, I'm sorry, did Destiel go canon? And then a bunch of people were like, hold on, what?
We're like,
because everybody was on Twitter doom scrolling at that point. And so then, like, I found out whatever, but I was one of the people who was watching and invested in the current storyline. So I was like, fuck, it's being spoiled for me right now.
Right.
So I was like, shit, I gotta find a copy. I gotta watch it right now.
Like, I could not
wait. I knew, like, I it was kind of spoiled. It wasn't like a complete thing for me.
You didn't know everything.
Yeah, but my partner watched it with me, and then my partner watched the end with me.
Oh boy, that's a combo. It's a double punch.
And they didn't know much about Supernatural, and they had gone from, you know what, maybe I am gonna watch all 15 seasons of this show from the beginning, and then they watched the end and they were like, I'm good. but now that we started this podcast, my friend Ollie and my partner was like, all right, I'll watch it, whatever. And the experience that they must be having is such a unique. They've seen Destiel, like, one of the first things they've seen is like some episodes in season 15, Destiel go canon, and the final episode, and then they went and watched the pilot.
Oh boy, you know, they are that example of like, if you watch the finale and the pilot back to back, they make sense, and then they can actually have that experience because they've actually done it.
Yeah,
with other content.
And so
like, that's not a good thing, but they've done it.
So when Destiel went canon, I was like, I need to give you some context for this. I need you to explain why I'm going crazy. So I went on YouTube and I started like finding like top 10, top 20 Destiel moments to show. And I was like, I'm not crazy. I need to show you whatever. And they were like, okay, yeah, damn, that is pretty gay. And all right,
they're like, we get it.
That's pretty insane. And so now they're like, I don't know what it's going to be like in this household.
To get there.
When we get to actual Castiel, like, because it'll be my first time seeing Castiel for the first time as well. Then, it's gonna, the energy, the vibes are gonna be absolutely rancid.
I love this for both your partner and also my partner, because we're also doing a watch. We're also finally watching it, and it's fascinating because, again, similar, like, my partner knows a lot of random stuff. Hears me record, hears me talk, like, has been hearing about this show for much longer than they would like to, and now we're watching, and it's just interesting.
Anyway, this episode did make me feel crazy. Maybe I need to go read some Destiel fanfiction of feeling emotion.
Okay, we need to move to another segment because this recording is so long, and we have a lot of really good things to say. Okay, next we're gonna move to our going meta segment. We are tracking lore, Bechdel test, pop culture. So first, death counter. There are 3 deaths in this episode, officially, like 3 that happen within the timeline of this episode. Bechdel test. Not only does this episode fail the Bechdel test, but it like does a lot of violence to female characters without giving them any significant role in the story other than that, which disappointing.
That's Supernatural.
So, moving on from Bechdel test, anything else in terms of lore or lore check?
They reference Raphael.
It's very like throwaway, and it's like it's when they're doing the like last rites for this priest.
The other cool part here was when he's explaining what angels in the Bible are actually like.
Yeah.
And obviously he does the part with Michael and the flaming sword of Dean, but the part where he's like, it seems like, oh, so they're not really the Hallmark version? They're fierce, right? And I was like, yeah, Slay Queen. The yassification of Castiel. And he's like, I like to think of them more as more loving than wrathful, but yeah, like the scripture paints them as God's warriors, and you're like, and then he does an actual piece of scripture, which is very funny because I believe that part is from the nativity story.
It is. It's from the nativity story. Yeah, it's the shepherd. It's the angels appearing to the shepherds, I believe.
That part out of context. It does also describe the scene where Castiel does meet Dean. It's Castiel's introductory scene, which is literally in a barn.
Okay. I am having a moment.
I've connected the dots.
I've connected them.
There's so much to unpack in that one part.
So much to unpack. We could talk about it for forever. We're gonna move on because otherwise we'll be here forever. Pop culture. So, Houses of the Holy. The title of this episode is the name of a Led Zeppelin album. We love our Led Zepp around here.
How many episodes of Supernatural do we think are named after an album or a classic rock song?
A lot. We've had several already. The episode naming is really interesting in Supernatural because, some shows have like a consistent, like, we pull from the themes or we pull from the actual events of the episode. Supernatural is like, we pull from whatever the fuck we feel like that week. Yeah. Sometimes it's just like faith. And then some weeks we're like Led Zeppelin reference. And then some weeks we're like, everybody loves a clown. Like,
yeah.
And that's just from season 1 and 2. There's a Batman reference. There's a Ghost reference. There's a Touched by an Angel reference. There's a SpongeBob reference. It's pretty par for the course. Anything else you want to say on like pop culture?
Dean sure gets touched by an angel, so... Foreshadowing.
And lastly, we have our gaydar section, sexuality, gender. This whole episode was a little bit of that. Anything like you want to add to that in terms of the episode, how it's presenting gender and sexuality?
A lot of people will talk about like Dean's journey of closeted bisexuality, that the journey of unpacking your religious bullshit is definitely a part of that for Dean. And I think we were saying this earlier, that no wonder gay people really like Dean. They're like, wow, he's got a complicated relationship with religion and he's got some closeted shit going on. That's my guy.
Yeah. And you know how many scenes they set in churches with Dean like talking about his feelings or his faith or his relationships. Like, man, we do set a lot of those scenes in churches just to drive the point home. No idea why we would do that.
And there's also no mention of his like attraction to women in this episode.
No, zero.
He mentions a hooker, but only because there is one in the show in the beginning.
And there's no there's very little. Yeah, good catch there. So we have 2 more little segments. Firstly, we are going to do our theme songs of the week. Do you have a song in mind?
Obviously, like Living on a Prayer would be one, and then the other one was Angel by Sarah McLachlan. But those are jokey jokes. There's 2 that are really popular on TikTok right now that I've been like, wow, these are Dean Winchester songs. But the one specifically for this episode is the God Must Hate Me by Katie Turner song. It's very much of like, God must hate me because like, look at this perfect person. They really used up all their juice on this person, and I'm just a mess. And I'm like, oh, that's a Dean flavor right there.
It's a very Dean flavor. It works for this episode too.
But also it's a Sam flavor, specifically in these early seasons. So that song has been very popular on TikTok. I'm sure you know the other one that's popular on TikTok right now, the like Christian rock one that everyone's like, actually, this is a queer anthem. I was like, that's a Dean Winchester song.
It's funny because I'm on like in my personal TikTok, I get a lot of like queer, religiously raised stuff, and so I get that song in there, and then I also on my podcast TikTok I get the exact same, like I get all of that but applied to Supernatural.
You're like,
very funny intersection of my 2 worlds. I'm like, I can't escape that song, apparently. Way too fitting. The song I'm gonna go with is also based on Sam in this episode, and it's Sea Lion by Sage Francis. It's a song that I've associated with Sam for a really long time. It will probably be one in a future season I will use again because it's one of those songs. Sam doesn't have that it's not fully realized some of the themes of this song yet, but we see the beginnings of them. Like, we've talked so much in this episode of Sam just like wanting to be good, but seeming to keep getting stuck with things he didn't ask for, the voices in his head and the choice he's being forced to make. And this song hits you right where it hurts for that. So finally today, but we have a fic rec of the week suggestion. With that note, obviously read the tags. You get what you get on the box. We'll recommend fics, and we're not going to necessarily talk about all of the content that may or may not be in them.
What I have to recommend is one someone recommended to me that is currently open in my tab. If you've been around Supernatural fandom for a while, like, the Supernatural Tangled AU is not a new thing. Everyone, here's the thing. Well, people have been comparing Dean to Rapunzel for quite some time. They're like, oh, the green eyes, and he's kind of blonde, whatever, like, for quite some time. But here's the thing. This is gonna be my pitch. There's a Tangled series. It is phenomenal, amazing, show-stopping, incredible. It does introduce a character that is a woman and becomes her best friend, and literally it's not really a love triangle, but it basically is. Where she's like, yeah, here's my boyfriend Eugene, and here's my bestie, and they're basically in a polycule. Number one, they do sing a song about finally being free as birds together, singing. Number two, she loses her memory at one point and like reenacts all of the scenes from Tangled, but Cassandra, her friend, fills in for Eugene, and you're like, oh, that's a little gay.
That's not a little gay, that's a lot gay.
Here's where I'm gonna pull in the Supernatural. Here's the real. You guys know how Destiel's canon, but it's like really canon in the Spanish dub. There's another show where it's canon in the Spanish dub.
Oh
character
my
with
gosh.
green eyes and a character named Cass.
No.
Where they say te amo. I want you to guess what show that is.
That is incredible.
If I had a nickel.
I'd have two nickels.
Weird nickels. And it's weird that it happened twice. When I realized this, I was like, I'm on another plane of existence. So, the Tangled AU is not just about like, oh, they'd be cute as like them. No. The Tangled AU is on another level. Another level. So the Tangled AU, Destiel, means a lot to me in general, and I've read many a Tangled AU. Shout out to the Cody One Tangled AU. I can't find that link anywhere, but it was real good. This one, Castiel, is actually Rapunzel in this one, which also makes sense. You could argue
also
either
works.
way.
Also, honestly, also works.
It's called Untangled by Quwarichi, Quwarichi. It's an AU, so it's like a fantasy AU. And I wouldn't be me if I didn't talk about Tangle.
I love that. I love that you're bringing your entire wealth of loves to this show.
If I don't talk about Thrawn or Tangled, it ain't me.
That's fantastic. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of our show. You can subscribe to Driver Picks the Podcast wherever you get your shows, and you can come talk to us on social media. All of our links are in the description. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find your show, Mystery Spotcast? Because I think you mentioned some of your socials earlier, but I want to give you another chance to just plug those, and I will also put those in the show notes.
So my social media is at Klaudia Says, Klaudia Says, but our podcast, the Mystery Spotcast, is at Mystery Spotcast. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Come ask us questions. Our Q&A is open. Either me or my co-host Ollie will answer questions. I'm also the co-host of a Star Wars podcast, as you know, which is RuPaul's Pod Race. We're also Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Yeah, I'm constantly online, so you can find me. And if you can guess what my Tumblr URL is, I'm still around. You definitely have seen my shit. Unfortunately.
There's your mission, folks. Find the Tumblr. But
the clue is I've never changed it since high school. It's very long and it's extremely cringy. And it does involve
that is a pretty good clue.
Oh, here's the biggest clue. It involves a Doctor Who reference and a Wicked reference.
That's amazing. Thank you for being here. It was fantastic to have you.
Thank you for having having me. I know, we talked about the most absolutely unhinged episode.
Such a good episode to do. I was so excited when you chose this episode. So excited.
Now I'm gonna be thinking about it nonstop.
Next week, we will be discussing season 2, episode 14, Born Under a Bad Sign, through the theme of disillusionment. Thank you to everyone listening for coming along for the ride. We wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.